Alright, welcome to Polyfile. I'm Jeff. Today I'm going to be talking all about jealousy. Even though jealousy does come up as a topic of conversation quite frequently within the polyamory world, it's actually something that you're more likely to hear as a question from someone outside that world. When you talk to people within a polyamory community, you tend to end up hearing kind of their different perspectives on their own experiences with the emotion of jealousy. So some of them will say that, no, I don't experience that anymore. That's not who I am. Others will say, oh, well, I do, but I understand how to sort of understand my way through it and kind of own the feeling. So how come these different perspectives can all exist within that world? Well, I'm going to say that they're kind of right and kind of wrong. And this is because jealousy itself is something where we kind of lost the definition of that word. It's now something we use in ways which don't really make sense. And that makes it really difficult to communicate because we're no longer being precise. Again, everything in this channel is about trying to come up with precise ways of communicating with each other. And jealousy is a good topic to touch on exactly what we've lost there and exactly what we can get back. In terms of specific definitions, if you look at what jealousy means, it's actually defined in terms of a kind of negative feeling you get in anticipation of a loss of something that has great value to you. Now, you may have noticed that definition doesn't actually refer to relationships or anything about interpersonal contact between humans at all. It just talks about the anticipated loss of something important. Now, that could be a relationship. That's a good example of something that's usually very important to us. But it could be other things too. You could be worried about losing your job. You could be worried about losing your house, something like that. These are things that are generally very valuable to people. That anticipation of losing them, the negative feeling that you get in that situation, that's jealousy. But wait, don't we often use it in a slightly different way when we're talking about it as it applies to relationships? Don't we usually use it to mean envy? And yeah, that's where a lot of this confusion starts. Often when people are talking about a feeling of jealousy, when you actually look at what they're talking about, they're actually explaining envy. These are very different emotions. They have very different contexts. While you can experience a feeling of envy in a relationship context, it's not the same thing as jealousy. Confusing these two makes it very hard to have meaningful conversations about them. But those aren't the only ways that we confuse this. Depending on who you talk to, you're going to get any number of different definitions of what jealousy means to them. And this confusion is what leads to that breakdown in communication. But what are just a few of the ways that we can sort of look at how this might be different within a relationship? What are some good examples of completely different interpretations of this and how they actually could lead to a breakdown in communication and even worsen a problem in a real relationship itself? Well, first of all, you might actually be expressing yourself as, yeah, I feel jealousy because I'm worried about losing you in say, a relationship situation. Oh, you seem very interested in someone else. I'm worried you're trying to replace me. I'm worried that I'm going to lose a relationship that I value a lot. That's something that is what people will talk about a lot. And in polyamory, this is one of the uses that people often use because it actually talks about something which is not about control. It's not about desire or anything. It's about feeling like something bad is about to happen. You're about to lose something valuable to you. And that's often what it will mean. And historically, that's what it was supposed to mean. But that's not all. To some people, it is a concept of envy. This is actually a very common kind of conflated emotion. And interestingly enough, within, say, a relationship situation, you can have multiple different kinds of envy. You can be envying the different other players in the relationship itself. Maybe you're polyamorous, maybe you're in an open monogamous relationship, and you might be envious of the attention that your partner receives. Maybe they're a really popular social butterfly, maybe there's something very attractive about them, something like that. They get tons and tons of attention. You feel upset, not because you're worried you're going to lose them. You may have set things up in such a way that you both trust and communicate very openly and are very happy with what you have, and at no point does anyone feel neglected or anything. So really, when you say, oh, I'm jealous of that, you're not. You're saying you're envious. You want the attention they receive. You're upset that how come no one ever looks at me that way. And that's understandable why that would happen, but it's not jealousy. Just call it what it is, and it'll avoid some miscommunication and some confusion. Now, there's other kinds of envy as well that can show up, which usually you see them just within kind of polyamorous environments, but they can exist outside of them. It's just more common there. When maybe your partner has started seeing someone new, and it's that kind of honeymoon period, the new relationship energy, the limerence, whatever you want to call it. And they're very, very interested in going to see this person, always excited to go see them, and you become envious of their partner's other partner. That, well, why aren't they that excited to come see me? And of course, the reason is that your relationships at different points, they just act that way. That's actually a pretty common phenomenon. It doesn't mean they are leaving you or that they're less interested in you. It just means that the way people express it at those different points are different. Now, you can talk about that, and you should if that's upsetting you, but realize that that's not jealousy. And if you call it jealousy, you're just going to confuse things. Now, another thing that a lot of people will refer to as jealousy, and this thing you pretty much exclusively hear within kind of a monogamous world, the polyamory world, you typically don't hear people talk about this. But it's a good example of a very, very different interpretation of what jealousy means, and part of why using the term too vaguely can confuse a lot of people and cause communication breakdowns to get worse. And that is the one of a sort of possession. We've made an agreement between us that we will only interact in certain ways with each other. Therefore, we sort of have a certain ownership of each other. You doing something outside of that agreement, that's a violation of essentially a contract of sorts. So you're now giving away something which is entitled, to which I'm entitled exclusively. And so it's sort of a possessive nature, but it doesn't need to be expressed that darkly. A lot of monogamous people feel these things, and they just kind of describe it more in terms of a social predictability or kind of a cultural pattern and something they've just come to expect and understand about their environment. But again, because it's based on those ideas, you tend not to hear that as much within the polyamory world. So why does it matter that how we define these things? Why not just use jealousy to describe all these situations the way our common culture in North America usually does? Well, the problem is that when you don't have precise words, you do not have effective interpretation. So I might go up to a significant other I have and say, oh, I'm feeling really jealous because you've been spending time with this some other guy or girl you're seeing. Well, she might then become very upset with me saying, oh, you don't own me. This isn't something where you get to decide what I do. And see, we've taken something which was a basic form of a certain kind of sadness and turned it into a very angry sort of argumentative response. Because what if what I was saying was, oh, I feel like I'm losing you. And what she heard was, you're doing something I don't want you to do. Because if we say, oh, those are both reasonable interpretations of jealousy, then when you approach someone and talk about things, they might not use the same definition you do. It's a fear I always have that you're going to walk into a conversation, several people will speak, they'll all walk away thinking that they had a great conversation, and none of them will have an agreement on what the conversation actually was, because their words were too vague. So how do you get around this then? Well, just try and be specific. Personally, I never use the word jealousy because I think it's too vague. If I'm actually feeling that, I'll say something like, I feel like I'm losing you. Or I'm worried about this, I'm worried that I'm going to lose something here. I'm worried that what we have is going away. And people will say, oh, you mean jealousy? It's like, sure, if calling it that helps. But because to a lot of people it's different terms, or sometimes all of those terms, it can actually change the meaning of what you're saying. You want to make sure that you hear what they're saying. So it's important to be precise. Communication is important. Precise communication is equally important. Okay, then beyond just the terms, how then do people deal with jealousy? What's the way through this within a relationship? How do poly people do it? Well, first of all, there's a few ways that polyamorous individuals tend not to be as threatened by this, and that's because of things like, well, if I acknowledge that my partner is not looking for just one person, if they find someone else, that doesn't necessarily affect anything they have with me. That's why you'll often hear them say like, oh, well, yeah, I don't experience jealousy, because to them they might assume that, well, everything in my environment, I trust all those people to kind of continue on with me as they were, no matter what happens in their life. Whether they get a new partner, whether they get a new job, whether they get a new child, a new pet, whatever. Any of these things which change the dynamics of the time that they have available, time and resources, I assume that we'll still have something that is valuable between us. Now, the other reason why people might say they're not afraid of jealousy is they might actually feel as though they're very internally satisfied. So, yes, they would be upset if they were to lose a relationship that's important to them, but because they don't associate that with a sort of emotional devastation, they'll often say that, oh yeah, I don't feel jealousy. Now, in that case, they probably do. It's just probably something that they look at it and go, well, culturally, I don't experience that on nearly as devastating a level as most other people do when they're using that word. So obviously that's not what the word means. So that's another kind of corner case where an issue of extremes can change what people mean. Okay, so now that we know what this is, well, how do we get through this? What's the magic word, the kind of secret phrase that the polyamorous people know that gets past this problem? And the answer is there isn't one. Nothing's that simple. You have to communicate with people and just hope that you can all operate together in good faith. So does that mean that polyamorous people are not immune to these concerns? Of course. Bad things can happen to anyone. It doesn't matter how you define your own personal philosophies regarding it or the situation where it occurred. So how do you deal with it then? Well, it's really hard to even suggest things. You need to communicate openly and honestly. Communicate without accusation. Remember, your feelings are things that are within you. They're not within someone else. You can't feel upset and go to someone and say, you're doing this thing that bothers me, because that puts them on the defensive. So it's like any effective communication, the idea that you need to talk about not what makes you upset, not what someone else is doing. You need to talk about how you feel and what you think would help you get out of that feeling, what you think you actually need, what the solution is. Talk about solutions, not about problems. If you have to talk about problems, that's more for context. You're trying to explain to someone how you feel. You're not asking them to do anything yet, and that's fine. You need to have that ability to communicate effectively with people in your life. So anyway, it is a huge topic of conversation, of course. It's one that really requires a bunch of people who trust each other well or know each other well, or people who understand human psychology really well, to be able to sit down and talk about what's the right way of getting through this in your specific situation. All I can say myself is that, yeah, it's complicated. Yes, it exists. Is it the same as what everyone thinks it is? Well, no, it's fairly individual. But the main thing is, I want people to know what the words mean and make sure that they're actually being precise. Don't just say, I feel jealous, and walk away as though that explains anything. That opens more questions than it provides answers. That should be the beginning of a conversation, not the end of one. So I hope that you like this talk. Please leave comments here if you have any kind of suggestions for future talks, questions relating to this one, because I always love talking to people. So let me know what you think, and I'll get right on it. Thanks. Bye.